you. Points will be awarded for questions. I know we have a question from Ollie Rayner already, so he is winning. If you do want to ask a question, if you could just put your hand up, I think everyone in the audience can do that. Good to see Nick. Good to see that, Luigi. We've got people who are ready to engage. So I'm going to ask some questions. Interrupt if you have specific points you'd like to explore. Wolfgang, opportunities for the pharma industry to embrace this new digital value chain. Can you perhaps talk about how you're exploring that at the clinician interface?
The clinicians are currently, I'm speaking now from the perspective also as a university professor teaching in North America. There's a big fear right now on the physician side to lose a part of the revenue stream right now by handing over part of the decision process or the therapeutic approaches to an algorithm-based decision tree, more or less. So right now, the challenge is when you're coming from a pharma perspective, how to engage the physicians when you're introducing a new technology. And let's maybe use diabetes as a superb example also in Germany. Germany has the situation that we have less and less diabetologists, less specialists, but more people with diabetes. And now we need to come up with new solutions how to reach those patients, how to remotely monitoring them, and maybe also do lifestyle modification through digital platforms. There was a huge push for that already 3-5 years ago, but the physicians associations have been pushing back because they thought they would be taken out of that revenue stream completely. And the only way you can move this forward if you come up with a business model that the physicians feel that they're still being a part of this chain and that those patients are not taken away from them. So the ownership of the patient will be still very important. But here again, we're not talking anymore about patients because those patients come with a huge knowledge base now to you in your office. And they're coming already with a printout from what they found from Google and what they want now. So they come in, they put the documents on the table and say, doctor, I want this prescription, I want this recommendation, I want this, and you just sit there and you rubber stamping. So I think for a physician like me who was trained in the 90s, it's all of a sudden a completely paradigm shift. You need to deal differently with your patient. It's more of a consulting role. In the old days, you made the decisions for your client, the patient, and now it's more collaborative approach. And now we also have all of a sudden a data stream, you being in a position where you get emails sent into your inbox about how your patient is active from his Fitbit or Jawbones. You see his values, if he's going up or down with his HbA1c. So you become almost like a data manager or host to coach your patient. So it's not anymore like this top-down approach from physician to patient. Now it's almost, you're on the same level almost. And this is a completely new role that you have to grow into as a doctor. And I see my older colleagues are really struggling with this. The big medical schools and here the universities in the North American market are leading again, setting up now new chairs and new institutes for digital medicine, how to deal with this kind of a new environment. Whereas the European universities are just watching and they're kind of taken aback and they say, well, how do we tackle this right now? So we have a little bit of a lag time in Europe to catch up again. And the technology is moving so fast and the regulatory environment and the teaching environment is not picking up the speed that we need to. So that will be, starting already at the training of the doctors, be a huge challenge in the next 5 to 10 years to catch up because the gap between technology and what we're doing right now is getting bigger and bigger. So it's not a very bright outlook.
Oh, we'll win.
Unless we really tackle this very aggressively soon.
And we've always had that problem. Aneurin Bevin setting up the NHS was heard to remark he stuffed their mouths with gold, referring to how he brought the clinicians into the NHS, so some things don't change. John, as I move to you, can I also perhaps ask you to consider, perhaps for a population of some of the respiratory or cystic fibrosis patients, how sensors and Internet of Things could be exploited to help patients manage their health?
Okay, I was actually going to pick up on something that
I know,
Wolfgang
but we had a question
first.
from the audience, but you can make your point as well.
A patient who turns up that has all that information has actually taken control of their disease. That isn't the case in a lot of patients. And the big opportunity for pharma is that adherence to drugs in chronic diseases is around 50% or less. So if you could double, if you could actually get patients to take the medicine as prescribed, you could double the entire market share. The problem is that those patients aren't taking the medicine for a variety of reasons, some of which are conscious. Why do I need to take this? I'm not feeling bad, or I'm worried about side effects. And some of it is unconscious. So, you know, I forgot, or I wasn't using the inhaler properly. So actually, the consultation process needs to start to become more motivational. It's about changing behaviors. It's not simply about presenting patients with data, because not every patient is data rich. We're all very numerate probably in this audience. But for some patients, it might be, well, do you realize that when you go to hospital, your grandchildren have to be put into care so that your children can come and visit you? It's not about risks, it's not about numbers, it's about emotional triggers and not factual triggers necessarily. So to your point, particularly in the respiratory area, we're not just dealing about with when patients take the medicine. We also have to deal with how they take the medicine. So are they actually using the devices correctly in the first place? And this is where the internet can undoubtedly help, because you can have educational programs that are based there. So even simple things like using your phone to scan the barcode on the medication might take you to a website that actually teaches you how to use the device properly and helps reinforce the training. If you go into monitoring symptoms, you know, everybody who goes on a weight loss program is monitoring their weight on a weekly basis, and they're getting positive reinforcement that what their change in diet is leading to a positive outcome. So linking together monitoring of vital signs with taking the medication, so you get this positive feedback loop so patients can actually see they're improving. And you know, I think it is very important that you don't just treat the pill taking in isolation, but you actually combine it with managing the patient overall.
And I hope for some of the paediatric patients we can make that fun and perhaps game it and allow them to share their gaming behaviours and reinforce that behaviours. Because, you know, being sick is a chore. Spent a lot of time in hospital as a child. If we can make it fun, that helps.
With one caveat, and that is you don't make it too much fun. Because the last thing you want is for the kids to be taking too much medication.
Yeah.
Because actually they only got halfway through their Angry Birds and they want to get to the end, so I'm going to take another pill to help me get to the end. Absolutely.
Alex?
I think the word collaboration in response to the initial question is something that is really missing. At the moment, we have drug companies that have a very defined regulatory pathway for a pharmaceutical product, which they will design clinical trials to meet those expectations and gain approvals. You've got medical devices, equipment that needs to monitor what we're trying to look at in the home, being delivered by different companies. It's not necessarily in their interest to either embark on large RCTs because they financially haven't got deep enough pockets, or is in line with their strategic intent necessarily with that product. So I think what we do struggle with is that lack of alignment between both parts of the industry, so that we're not working collaboratively enough to make the data available in the way that we need it to prove what we're trying to prove with this technology. And I think the problem is also with the regulations, because as soon as we move away from the pure pharmaceutical model in terms of the traditional way of getting an MA, and somebody steps outside of that, that has an element of risk, and nobody likes risk. So it becomes a little bit of a vicious circle where starting to add in things like service provision, telehealth that proves efficacy on top of a pharmaceutical product, whilst offers a strong differentiation, probably also brings a lot of risk. And I think that is also part of the dilemma.
A question? Richard, can you just wait till the microphone arrives?
So Alex, yes, to respond to your point about collaboration, I expect the last thing a patient wants is to take 5 different pills every day. And then if we're having mobile apps and health applications, the last thing I want to have 5 different apps to remember to use every day because we use 5 different drug providers. So the point of collaboration is key. Should we be working towards a single industry platform for monitoring health measures, rather than each organisation trying to do it individually?
I think that's a very good point. Because taking that example, in the space that I work, there's 5 or 6 companies which essentially have the same product. They're all running adherence programs using some elements of digital media. Now, do they all meet the requirements of the patient and clinician? No. Some of them are good, some of them maybe are not so good. But without some commonality of a platform, there's more sort of structure around the sorts of things that companies can use going forwards as a platform. We're always going to have companies going off in different directions. And the person that suffers is obviously the patient. So collaboration, but also having more standards from which we can work on, I think would be hugely beneficial. So I completely agree.
Are there any differences?
Again, just from my experience, I'd say no, but John's probably more qualified to
So I'm jumping in and saying yes, there are. There's a very interesting open approach being developed in the US called Mosaic, which is allowing clinicians to prescribe components of digital support which can actually be brought together through one interface. So, you know, we're already sort of starting to address some of those areas. Professore.
Okay. Hi, Gina Martini from King's College London. It's really around the point that Alex made about collaborations, and it's the regulatory piece, because that, to me, is the biggest hurdle, really. I mean, let's take it back to basics. I have a father who's diabetic who takes, 12 tablets a day. And I'd love to be able to combine that into a super pill that puts 3-4 ingredients into one tablet, fix those combinations. And yet the progress of fix those combinations has been frustrated by regulatory agencies. It's been helped by regulatory agencies. Recent data in The Lancet shows that adherence goes through the roof if you put all the drugs into one tablet. And yet I've been on projects when I was at GlaxoSmithKline where we couldn't even get these combinations through an FDA or an EMA discussion. So that's the backdrop to simple formulations. What you're describing is fantastic, but I just wonder how much engagement the agencies around the world have actually had in trying to help you do this. Do they recognise it? Do they see it as importance? You know, it's a key question for me, because if they're not on board, then we're wasting our time.
Christoph is going to respond to that.
Yes, and I think there's movement. So let's take insulin. So in diabetes management, I think it's proven that you can't stop the disease. People, well, if they want to avoid late-stage complication, insulin is doing the job. However, the way insulin is being used today with injections is not necessarily what makes people embark on that therapy, right? There's still that big hurdle. So I would everybody like to review one recent drug approval in the US. Inhaled insulin. And the story is interesting because of the way it got approved. Public hearing, and you go on the FDA website and you just look at how FDA went into the public hearing, essentially deconstructing everything. Essentially saying, well, your RCTs are not really making the point, and your statistical significance here and there has some edges, and we really wouldn't see blah, blah, blah. I mean, the typical risk-averse approach. And then the hearing evolves, and patient groups show up. And patient groups show up, pump patients, type 1 patients, type 2 patients. FDA approves the product 2 months later. And the reason for that is that even in the US today, in certain instances, the patient voice does matter. Look at multiple sclerosis as another example. Recent approval of Lemtrada, which took a second or third round after those consultations. So yes, I do believe it will work through agencies, but agencies need their consultation with the ultimate end user. And I'm not totally pessimistic with regards. However, all of those cases are extremely tough. And if you sit in the big pharma machine that has licensed the respective drug or is considering licensing it, and you have your business case there, and you ask yourself, what are your risks to monetization of all of that? that is an unknown, and that is very difficult to work through. I would agree to that. But I think we have to take the positive examples and build on those.
If I could just add, there's a whole second set of regulation that has to be considered here as well, which is medical device regulations and not just pharma regulations. So as soon as you start to put medical data down a communication device, it starts to be regarded as a medical device. And our experience has been that where we've rolled out applications like this, we actually do it on lockdown devices, because that makes the regulatory pathway much simpler. And it also stops either the patient corrupting the system, or companies like Apple suddenly downloading another iOS and corrupting your system. So actually, the concept of the smartphone doing everything isn't yet a reality by any means.
And Android devices are cheap enough to make that not difficult.
John, you just made an interesting statement about Apple, and having been in the pharma industry now for almost 20 years, I gave up a little bit on waiting for the changes coming from pharma. I'm almost convinced that the push is now coming from either the telecommunication industry, the software industry, or one of those external players. And they will be providing the new standards, they will be providing the platforms. And if the telecom industry, with all the deep pockets, let's look at Vodafone, who's sitting on about 60 billion in cash right now. And I wouldn't be surprised if they pick one of the pharma companies like a Gilead, who's into the space of chronic disease, because if you as a telecom industry move into the center of the data stream, you can manage the patients, you can manage the prescribers, and you pick up one or two of the smaller pharma companies who are in the chronic disease management space, and you have the whole value chain occupied. And you're reducing the pharma to manufacturing and R&D, and that's it. And I think this is the biggest threat to the pharma industry right now. It's not the competition, it's the players who are moving in from the outside.
And I think just while I wait for the mic to travel to two questions, I'm just going to reinforce that, because it is Qualcomm Ventures who are the most active investors in digital health right now, which is an interesting signal. And if you go to the Rock Health Digital Health Summit, we are not spending a lot of time on regulation. You know, it's all in entrepreneurial enthusiasm, and the regulations come later. Gentleman with the microphone.
Thank you. So my name is Richard Young, and I work for one of those vendors. I work for Medidata. And I was going to mention Qualcomm and the X-Clinical project, which I think is a fantastic idea. We're actually, not to do an advert for Medidata, but we actually have approached this different. We're using the iPhone, and we're using Android and apps to do bring your own device for patients. And actually what we're finding is we've actually gone as far as running our own studies. We went and created a protocol, submitted it to the ethics, went through the rounds to address all of their questions. Admittedly, we did it in the US because it's a bit easier, but we're actually completing our first two studies, and it was done, I hasten to add, no medications, but we did it to prove what we needed to do to achieve. And we've got that data streaming from Fitbits and Jawbones and everything. And we're now trying to find a way, particularly in diabetes, to give that data back to the patient. The idea being every Friday you get presented with a graph of your HbA1c, your glucose, your insulin levels, so that you're bringing the patient in. But I will just quickly add is the risk we're finding is people are now saying, to John's point and others, they're turning up to the investigator and saying, my treatment isn't working, am I unblinding the study, what do I want to do in my treatment? But for the first time ever, this is a great position for us to be in. The technology is ahead of clinical trials. And I apologise, there was no question, I just wanted to add.
And actually, if you want to search the hashtag for the FT Pharma conference, you'll follow the Medidata CEO presenting some of that. Bill, can I ask for the mic to be brought to you?
Great. Bill Dawson, one of the expert panel at Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst. Really, it's a reflection on what's happening at the bottom end. Our industry has typically been top-down. We'll tell the patients what they need. You reflected that. But now patient advocacy is significant, but it's really important that we recognize that the professional regulators of healthcare professionals are requiring patient contact for those healthcare professionals. And the modern generation of doctors and pharmacists and nurses are being required to be more interactive with patients. And if the industry, whether it's device or pharma, doesn't recognize that and work with it, they will be blindsided, because the the patients are being empowered by this process. And I think the impetus to have that happen, we can use to our benefit to monetize if we recognize it. But there aren't many companies actually trying to do that from the patient end.
Well, I'm going to let Massimo respond to that, and then I'm going to let this panel tell you how they are doing it. But the point is absolutely well made, Bill.
Yeah, more than an answer, I want to add a comment that is completely in line. I mean, there are two aspects, in my opinion, that are relevant and that we have seen during the implementation of some technology. The first one is that when you enter into the, let's say, you are driven by innovation, you have a new technology, a new app, whatever, and then you put into the context of the disease or the medical need. Then you get attracted by it, you get addicted, and you are convinced that that is the solution. And you tend to under inverted comma, to impose in a gentle way the solution. And if you look into the definition of compliance, adherence, and concordance, okay, this is written thinking to the dosage form of the delivery system, but there is a risk that we will get poor compliance or poor adherence due to the new technologies that we will introduce into the stream. Therefore, we should keep in mind that when we talk about patients, we talk about people with an issue, with a disease, with fears. And that there is a huge level of expectations that are different based on the different population, based on the different cultural position, based on the different disease. So I think that you are really right. I mean, we are the professional. We need to keep well into the equation. The expectations, the desires, and the quality of life that our patients are looking for. But at the same time, we have to be, let's say, strong enough in leading the story and teaching and using the regulation in the way that we offer them something that is really reliable and absolutely designed to bring benefit, not just to bring a better perception, you know.
Jason, a quick question.
Yeah, sorry. So listening to the conversation, so I think if you take it back to what's being provided here is a service. And with all services, you need to understand what your consumer, in this case patients, are looking for. And I think the thing that we've missed is that we're dealing with a generational issue here. So the younger generation expect to have information at hand. They trust the information at hand. And they will take that information and go to their physicians and say, I need. My generation, we're slightly skeptical. We've heard, don't believe anything on the internet, don't go on the internet, do never research on the internet if it's to do with medical. So we'll probably, if someone, a pharmaceutical company gives us that information, we'll trust that. My parents, they would never use it. And they would never trust that. They would want to see somebody. So from a service perspective, I'd be interested to hear how are you going to couple this with the healthcare providers to provide a service from the pharmaceutical industry and the regulations that need to be put in place behind that. This isn't a one size fits all, and it's a danger of chasing the technology rather than chasing the service that's required.
So I would make the point that healthcare's never been a one-size-fits-all population, and I don't believe it's generational. And the example I always give is an email that popped up into my inbox about 3 years ago from my ironing lady who lives next door and who's 82. Rowan, your ironing is ready, sent from my iPad. Okay, so I think, you know, these technologies are available to people who are willing to engage with them. It's not always a solution that fits all, but I don't necessarily believe age is a barrier. And I think, you know, this is the perfect segue. Thank you, Jason. It is the perfect segue to ask the panel to perhaps talk about some of their experiences and what their organizations are doing in the field right now. So Wolfgang, you know, your organization I know is 100% owned by Merck Sharp and Dohme. I suspect you're working with them and some of the other pharma companies. Can you tell me what you're finding?
Let me take maybe one step back in the organization I worked before, which was one of the blue chip companies as well. And heading global innovation there was actually a huge headache because the whole setup in the blue chip companies is anti-innovation, if you think about it. Because if you're trying to sell a concept in diabetes, lifestyle management to a product manager who's in charge of a diabetes product, and you can show in a clinical study that by lifestyle management changes, you reduce the progression of diabetes or can get them off the drug, that product manager is about to shoot you. Because he has a one-year target where he needs to make his numbers, and the innovation cycle in a big pharma company is 3 to 5 years. So right now there's a conflict, so it doesn't work. So what have the big blue chip companies done? Some have done it, some are still not in the process to do it. They say, let's earmark a certain amount of money, just put it out of the ROI calculations and do innovation with a shotgun approach, like Apple does it right now. And they say, let's do untargeted, undirected innovation. Let's see what comes out of it, and let's play with that money. Let's maybe burn 100 million or 200 million, which is when you have a company with up to 40 billion, 60 million revenues, is peanuts. But at the end, it opens up new business streams in a positive outcome. What do we do right now? We are in an arm's length relationship with our mothership right now, which allows us to do things that not necessarily the mothership would like to have us do. Because we could come up with new ideas, new business models that are maybe in conflict with the traditional business. One example. I'm sitting with some of the big reinsurance companies right now in the world, in Zurich, in Switzerland. And at the same table are some of the big telecommunication providers. And what are we discussing is how to define predictive algorithms, how can we do signal detection based on smartphone use, typing, errors, social interactions, and also the way you're sending your emails to predict an early onset of dementia, to make the diagnosis of Alzheimer's before you have it from a clinician. Because we're convinced by just the way you monitor your activity, your typing behavior, your errors, that we can pick that up 2 to 3 years earlier than usual. And as you know, the more aggressive you treat that disease, you can gain up to 10 years of a potential better outcome at the end. So all of a sudden now we have players at the table, also the automobile industry, who are converting cars to rolling diagnostic platforms. Why do they do this? Because the insurance companies say, let's come to a risk-based insurance model and use the car to pick up if somebody has atrial fibrillation. They put cameras on the dashboard to pick up the eye movement to see if you have early signs of dementia or fatigueness. So there's new players coming into the healthcare space. And we have to discuss the convergence of industries now. We have to go out of our ivory tower and work with companies like the Coca-Cola who are causing the diabetes endemic. But they're putting a lot of money on the
Allegedly.
side to battle
Sorry,
it again.
cancel in my ear.
Allegedly, of course. So there's companies now like Danone, like Nestle, they all want to say, let's work together. And I think this is a key that we have to pick up and open a lot of those locks that are closed so far. Go back in history to the video market. We had Beta, we had Video 2000, we had VHS. VHS was never the best technology. It was crap, but they had the better marketing initiative, and therefore it became the world standard. We were talking about standard before. The standard will be defined not by one of the players, it will be defined by the government bodies and the regulatory bodies. So somebody has to pick it up and say, be it the FDA or the EMA, and say, this is what we want to see from you, and everybody will follow. Look at all the smartphones. How many chargers did you have in your drawers? And slowly, we're having now 2 or 3 standards in the world. Before, I think I counted my last back count at home, I had 7 or 8 chargers. Sony, Nokia, and. It's slowly disappearing, luckily. And in the healthcare space, we're in the same spot right now. And we don't want to see in the future, and that's also talking me as a physician now, just a drug for a treatment. We want to have a holistic package deal. A diabetic patient wants to know about his foot care, he wants to know about his lifestyle. When you look, I don't know how much money you can make with a diabetes drug right now. The numbers we looked at when I was at Boehringer, we could make about 2,000 to 3,000 euros based on the drug a year, but a high-income person in New York City spends up to $75,000 on gym memberships, personal trainer, food, clothes, shoes, and everything. Do we want to let that revenue stream just go to Adidas? Why is a pharma company not courageous enough to pick up a chain of fit gyms? Why not? Just cross your boundaries. There you go.
Thank you.
John, how are you crossing the boundaries?
Well, we do work in telemedicine, and actually Alex is one of our key customers, so I'll let him talk about that. And instead, where Philips has also been playing is in remote monitoring of vital signs. And there was a study funded by the King's Fund and the NHS now about 3 years ago called the Whole System Demonstrator that took 6,000 patients with either diabetes, COPD or congestive heart failure. For 1 year, they were being remotely monitored. They were split into 2 groups. 1 year, they were remotely monitored. The other year, they weren't. During the year that those patients were remotely monitored, there was a 45% reduction in mortality. So a huge impact. The trouble is these were sick patients, and actually the net effect was you were keeping sick patients alive for longer, so there wasn't much health economic benefit, and there was no real improvement in quality of life, because what we were doing was monitoring the vital signs and not monitoring the treatment as well. So the key to a successful outcome, it's going to cost you the same to monitor the patients, whether you're monitoring them for one symptom or for a whole range of symptoms and medications. The key to it is combining the two to get the maximum power from it. Oh, and one other point that actually reflects back to customers. The other key customer in this is the physician. And so one of the things we've learned along the way is that with our software platforms, before we roll them out, we have very detailed conversations with the physicians, the caregivers that are going to use this, because this is a change in their work practice, so they have to buy into this, and we can tailor the package then to deliver what that individual care group want, rather than it being a one-size-fits-all from the care provision side. And in fact, there's a program running at the moment, sponsored, I think it's under Framework 7, looking at the barriers to introduction of telemedicine in reality across Europe. And the program is piloting introduction, taking the learnings, improving the introduction, and deploying again, all to help us overcome some of these very real personal barriers.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I'll just pick up on a couple of points and also try and give you a little bit of our experience. We've been running a telehealth program for a couple of years now, and the system allows patients to have access to a lot of their usage data to do with how they're taking their medications, things to do with their breathing parameters, all graphed nicely on a PC or laptop for them to access when they require to. And also access to tools such as breathing trainers, so they can check their inhalation technique and make sure they're optimizing the way that they're inhaling medications. And we started out with the assumption that dealing with an IT literate population, utilization of this type of technology would be relatively high. With frequent access. We were wrong. Utilization is low, and access is low. So I think we've become far more cognizant in terms of trying to understand better what the patient wants out of all of this. Why is utilization so low with this type of system? And you can maybe think of 2 or 3 reasons. One of which may be that the patient just doesn't want the clinician to see the data. It requires them to upload the data, and if that becomes something that the patient can control, maybe they don't want the clinician to see the data. Maybe they forget. Maybe they don't see the added value. Maybe they don't see the reason why they should be doing it. So there's barriers there that we don't fully understand in terms of why this type of technology is not being well adopted. But what we have learned is, as John alluded to, not surprisingly, the people that do use the technology are the good adherers. So the people that probably don't need to actually access this technology because they're doing everything right, the ones that actually do. And the ones that we're trying to touch and help and get most benefit out of the system don't. So we've learned a lot around that, but I think going back to changing behaviours, changing habits in people that perhaps aren't utilising the technology, we have started to see some significant success with a range of interventions, from a simple phone call from a physiotherapist or a nurse once a week can significantly improve adherence and compliance, right through to overarching psychological interventions such as motivational interviewing, which can be implemented across a clinic. 2 extremes there, but both interventions, both effective, and where we're at the moment is really trying to understand what tools work, where, with which patients, at what age. And then it's really working with the clinicians to allow them to have a toolbox to pull out the intervention that they think will work with the patients they're treating. So that's really sort of the challenge that we're facing today and going forwards. But if I knew what I knew now, we would have probably approached this very differently in terms of how we implemented this technology when we started.
Christoph, I think you can talk about the developing world as well as the developed world in some of your experiences.
Yeah, I will. I would like to thank my two speakers before for pointing to the human dimension of the problem. It is the very reason why I'm not convinced that Apple, Google, or Qualcomm Ventures will, in the next 2 or 3 years, change the world. Money is not enough with this. You can go to Rock Health conferences and see the billions of dollars. But we have almost zero interest rate, and the problem is so big that I'm not really surprised that these guys put all this money up. Valuation of all those money companies is through the roof. It's economically insane, I think working in a publicly traded company, you have to, as a manager, also look at reasonably at those things. So the utilization of apps in diabetes is 5% of the population in the US, and for the very reasons you mentioned. We happen to have the most downloaded one in Sanofi, and I will tell you which one it is. It has no tracking of your insulin injection. It does not ask you to synchronize through some Bluetooth your blood glucose measurements. It does not ask for your jawbone. It is called Go Meals. And what it helps you does is, when you're in a restaurant, do the job of understanding what you have in front of you. That is the real issue in diabetes. I mean, these people are all about what can I eat? And that is the real human dimension of the problem of this disease. Has nothing to do with finger sticks, has nothing to do with HbA1c, what's this kind of strange of thing? Fasting glucose, hypoglycemia, that's medical language. The real human problem is a different one. So yeah, Go Meals. Now, can we make money with Go Meals? Frankly, I don't think we can. We have a couple of dollars from downloads, but that's not really the business model. To the examples that you asked me, I would like you to share 2 or 3 with you. Certainly, and I think you have to do it if you're responsible in a pharma company, you have to find a way that you monetize on your base business, on your existing business, which is utilization, adherence, dose, and all those things. We've been doing this with monitoring. Very obviously, if you know where you are, you will use appropriately. And we've been doing it by trying to bring blood glucose monitors, which are not a waste of data, because blood glucose monitoring, if you know diabetes, you prick yourself, and what happens with the data? Literally nothing. What we're doing is we're putting insulin dose advice into the thing, and we're doing it in a way that the thing becomes the doctor at your fingertips, because this device will be a prescription device, which is kind of your daily interaction with your doctor who tells you how to dose. We have a second approach where we don't go through the product, but we go in a more product-agnostic way, which is really the step into care delivery. I do not know today whether pharma will be in care delivery. I think it's challenging, but we've recently signed a big deal with Apollo Hospitals in India, and we're basically investing into the equity of them building diabetic clinics. These diabetic clinics are just stepping up the standard of diabetes care, foot care specifically in India, which is a huge issue. But the business model is not at all linked to selling our insulin. The business model is just being there, exploring with the physician what needs to be done. And my last sentence will be on the physician, him or herself. Yes, I am convinced, because trust is such an important part of the equation, that we cannot forget him or her in the equation. And although we may think it's traditional and it's slow, our experience is only if we service them, then we can ultimately service the patient.
Cool. Massimo, I'm going to let you have the last word, but I'm just going to invite a question from the floor at the back before you get the last word, because I am conscious that an hour has almost flown.
Thank you very much. Duncan Judd, Iridian. I'm based at the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst. I think you've just touched on a very interesting point, and that's around economics, and I've not really heard much about that. No doubt, mHealth is very interesting technology. It looks doable, but who is going to pay for it? Who's going to get a return on investment? That, to me, is the issue. I've not heard anything, and I'd like the panel to give their views on that, please.
So Christoph is going to tell you his view, and I'm going to then pass along to Massimo.
You see, short term, 3 to 5 years, I do think you can monetize on it if you monetize through an existing business model where your mHealth leverages your drug business. Standalone, I see no scalability in the next 3 to 5 years. And I see interesting valuations coming up for some of those companies who have 50, 100 million in there, who today believe they will sell for 300, 400 million to a big pharma, and maybe they won't. So.
John, do you agree?
Well, there are, I think, a variety of business models here. So there is a private pay model, particularly for concerned relatives living distantly from parents, etc. If you look at fall detection, remotely monitoring, it's the offspring that are paying for that for their elderly relatives. It's not the patient themselves. So there's definitely a private pay model. I think it comes back to outcomes again. And if you do the study to prove the benefit of what it is you're doing, then the payers will be only too pleased to queue up to pay for this because they will see a health economic return. The difficulty at the moment is finding the payers prepared to invest in doing the studies, and it's tending to be the technology providers that are having to do it a bit of a leap of faith.
So I get back to your question, what we are doing. So basically we are supporting or developing new technologies. So we are in the field of RFID, we are in the field of printing medicine, we are supporting better this that is in the field of social network system based. But what we are trying to do in a different way, we are trying to validate and test the new technologies, even if it's very difficult, into the context. So I give an example. We have RFID, very innovative. Infineon is the owner of the IP. He's a good leader. Of course, he's driven by the technology itself. He's asking us to test the technology into the packaging, into the box, into the tablets if possible. But he's forgetting, the context, and the context is the surrounding environment that is composed by the care system, the physicians, the patients that are different, the pharma company, the complexity of the supply chain, the regulatory agencies. So therefore what we are trying to do is that we are trying to create some, let's say, consortium that can be used in order to validate the technology into the context that involve also the patients. This is very difficult, but can give you a lot of answers that are not driven only by technology. On the other side, getting back to the question from the professor before, I think that it's very important that we do not forget that we are the professional. It's a matter of mindset that maybe we need to change. Therefore, we need to influence ourselves and the new generation of scientists in embracing in a different way the patient centricity or the patient requirements, what patient means. And in order to do this, we activated and we financed as RCP a professorship at TU Graz that is led by a former Pfizer director with 20 years of experience in pharmaceutical field, product development. And therefore, we are educating our students by keeping into the equation since the beginning what patients means, which are the expectations, what is the definition of adherence, concordance, what they feel, what they perceive, how difficult it is for them to understand what is behind the device or the tablet. So this is what we are doing.
Excellent. So one more question. 2 more questions. Go on, we'll let because the audience have been good sports in participating, for which I'm very grateful.
Yes, my name is Daniel Steenstra from Cranfield University, and I would like to go back to one of the first words that you used coming into this room, which is leadership, and I would add cohesion to that. Just my own experience, recently we were involved unsuccessfully in an application to get people suffering from cystic fibrosis to work with serious games. This was based on an experiment that was already working, so we knew that it was going to work. We were applying for funding. How can we make this commercial? And I would add, I think in jigsaw puzzles and lack of connection between jigsaw puzzles. What I'm hearing here is jigsaw puzzles, that that are successful up to a point, but don't get to the full impact because what is lacking is leadership and cohesion. So how do we get more leadership and cohesion? Where is that going to come from? Is it policymakers? Is it industry and so on? Thank you.
I'm just going to put a point of information that I learnt from my CF expert in the room this morning, which is the cystic fibrosis charity in the US has just sold its royalties on its the Vertex drug this morning, and now has $3.3 billion, which it will be spending, I would imagine, trying to repeat that trick and improving the lives of patients. Go and talk to them. Would be my approach. This market. So, Steve, can I ask for you, Dr. Grumpy, if you have a question?
Thank you. I've been struck by the fact that almost everything that's been said today has been talking about health in the context of illness. Where do you think leadership comes from? Where do you think responsibility comes from? How do we deliver health in the context of health? How do we maintain healthy lifestyles for those patients who haven't yet hit the healthcare system or the pharmaceutical companies? Who is responsible for that? And Wolfgang alluded to a few of those, but it's an interesting question because that actually is where we get to solve some of these problems. And it, as Wolfgang suggested, it's not necessarily in the interest of all of the existing partners, given their existing business models.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to use that as a question to prime coffee discussions, because I want to give Ollie Rayner one last insight and the opportunity to speak as the ultimate consumer of some of these things.
Well, I'm Ollie Rayner. I call myself a patient at large, but I also work with the Cystic Fibrosis Trust. And I'm very grateful to Alex and John for the work we do together in this area. But more generally, I always get a bit frustrated with the way these discussions turn into adherence and essentially sort of how to grow revenue for pharma. But I mean, that's obviously important. But I think there's also some cognitive dissonance. So if people in this room go to the gym and you join a gym and you have a plan that says I'm going to go 3 times a week, but you only go once or twice some weeks or none some weeks. If I own the gym, I say to you, okay, I need to educate you and change your behaviour. So I'm going to give you a punch card so you can punch in and out every time you come. I suppose people wouldn't be very responsive to that kind of strategy. But if I show you, if I demonstrate to you the benefit of going 3 times a week instead of twice or regularly attending, and I think probably that would be a more successful strategy. So I just think we were not going to make any real progress until we stop using the language of adherence.
So reward right behaviours, you know, find mechanisms
develop a sense of wellness.
Find a mechanism. I think, you know, it is not surprising that the end of a panel of such a big agenda for the whole of the healthcare and health industries isn't quite resolved after just an hour. I do expect it to have perhaps a bigger showing at next year's event. I would like to thank the panel for their candour and bringing their real-world experience. So if we could just join them. And perhaps, you know, in the next hour, reflect on the fact there are many customers for this technology, the patient, the clinicians, and change is coming. So we all have to get more interested, invest more, and generally, get involved in this discussion if we're going to have a piece of the solution. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.